The text came in at exactly 11:47 p.m. I miss your body already. Counting down the hours till Friday. Greg. I stared at the screen, unblinking. The room was dark except for the faint blue glow of my phone. But that one sentence was enough to burn itself into my brain, searing like a brand. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, the realization creeping in slow at first, then faster as if it was chasing down every excuse I tried to make for her. I scrolled up, heart thudding in my ears. The conversation stretched for weeks, no months. Late-night exchanges, little jokes that had no business being between coworkers, and then pictures. Not explicit, but close enough. Laura, my wife of 7 years, in that tight red dress she wore to her last business conference. The one she swore she hated. My thumb hovered over the call button, but something held me back. I wanted to storm into our bedroom, hold the phone up to her face, and demand an explanation she didn't have. But a deeper part of me, the part that still remembered the way she smiled at me over breakfast just this morning, that part needed more. I got out of bed quietly, letting the door click shut behind me as I padded down the hallway. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter, carelessly tossed aside when she came home late tonight. I opened it and found what I was looking for, the hotel key card. The Ritz, downtown, room 614. I clenched the card in my hand, feeling the plastic edges dig into my skin. I wasn't a suspicious man by nature. I trusted Laura. Or I did. But now, every late night, every unexplained phone call, and every lie disguised as an apology, they all started stacking up like evidence in a courtroom. I couldn't sit on this. Not till Friday. I had to know. By the time I parked outside the Ritz, it was 12:30 a.m. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few scattered cars and a single black SUV I didn't recognize. I slipped inside, the lobby quiet and dimly lit. The elevator ride to the 6th floor felt like it stretched on forever, the soft jazz music mocking me as I watched the numbers climb. The hallway was dead silent when I stepped out. Room 614 sat at the far end, the door standing innocently as if it wasn't hiding the truth I was about to uncover. I pressed the card to the scanner, and with a soft beep, the lock disengaged. The room was dark, except for the flicker of a muted television. I stepped inside, shutting the door quietly behind me. The faint smell of her perfume still hung in the air, mingling with something else, cologne that didn't belong to me. I walked further in, and that's when I saw them. Laura, asleep, tangled in the sheets with him. Greg. The rage that surged through me was instant, blinding. I wanted to grab him, throw him out of that bed, but I forced myself to stop. Not yet. Not like this. I stood there, silent, watching the rise and fall of their bodies as they slept, completely unaware of the storm building inches away from them. I took out my phone and snapped a picture, then another. I wasn't about to let Laura weasel her way out of this with smooth words and crocodile tears. This was going to hurt, and I wanted her to feel every inch of the betrayal she'd brought into our home. By the time I walked out of that room, I already knew exactly how I was going to destroy her. I left the hotel without a word, letting the door close softly behind me. The cold air outside felt like ice against my skin, but it wasn't enough to extinguish the fire burning inside. By the time I got home, the clock read 2:14 a.m. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the wedding photo hanging over the fireplace. Laura's bright smile, the way her hand gripped mine so tightly, like she'd never let go. What a joke. I poured a glass of whiskey and sat down at the dining table, phone in hand. I scrolled back through the messages. Greg, that smug son of a bitch. The way he called her baby and his girl. How long had this been going on under my nose? How many nights had she left me sitting at home while she tangled herself up in hotel sheets with him? I wasn't going to ask her. I wasn't interested in hearing whatever lie she'd come up with to soften the blow. I already knew the truth. I just needed to decide how to handle it. At 6 a.m., the front door creaked open. Laura tiptoed inside, still wearing the same black dress she left in yesterday. I stayed seated, watching as she dropped her heels by the door and yawned. She didn't even glance toward the kitchen, too busy scrolling through her phone. Probably texting Greg. I waited until she'd made it halfway up the stairs. Late night, She froze. I saw her shoulders stiffen, just for a second, before she turned around, her face already plastered with that fake, innocent smile. "Oh, hey, babe." "Yeah." The conference ran long. We grabbed a few drinks after. "I told you not to wait up." I didn't say anything. I just let my eyes linger on the faint smudge of red lipstick on her neck. The same shade I never saw her wear for me. "Must have been some drinks," I said, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. "You smell like cologne." Laura's hand drifted to her neck, rubbing at the spot she knew damn well I'd noticed. "Oh yeah." I hugged a few coworkers. "You know how it is. Lies. Effortless." I almost admired how smoothly they came out of her mouth. She lingered for a second, watching me, maybe gauging whether I'd push the issue. When I didn't, she flashed me that half-hearted smile and disappeared upstairs. I waited until I heard the shower running before standing up and heading to the garage. It was time to take this to the next level. That morning, I made a call to a friend of mine, Aaron. We'd known each other since college. He worked in tech security now, the kind of guy who could find out everything about you with just a name and a phone number. "Greg Winters," I said when he picked up. "I need everything on him. Address, work info, background. Whatever you can find." Aaron whistled. "You sound serious. Something I should know?" "You stay. I'll pay you double your usual rate. Consider it done." Laura came downstairs an hour later, freshly showered, wearing one of her business suits. She kissed me on the cheek, barely glancing in my direction as she grabbed her car keys. "I've got meetings all day. I'll be home late," she said. Of course she would. I watched her drive away, calm and composed, as if she hadn't just spent the night wrapped around another man. Let her play her game. I wasn't going to stop her. Not yet. By noon, Aaron sent me everything I needed to know. Greg was exactly the type of guy you'd expect. Clean-cut, mid-level management at some finance firm, divorced with no kids. Lived about 20 minutes from us, in one of those sterile new developments with manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses. I drove by his place that afternoon, parking a block down, far enough that no one would notice me. His car was there. Silver Audi. License plate matched what Aaron found. It was one thing to know he existed. Seeing his house, his whole pathetic life, made it real. I sat there for a long time, imagining the smug look on his face when he opened the door for Laura. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he laughed about the fool I must have looked like. He wouldn't be laughing soon. That evening, I went home and set the plan in motion. Laura's phone sat charging on the counter when she came home. She'd left it unlocked, probably assuming I'd never go through it. I wasn't the type, except now I scrolled through her messages, screenshots of their conversations saved directly to my email. I found Greg's number and copied it. And then I waited. At exactly 8 p.m., Laura's phone buzzed. "Greg, you free to talk?" I can't stop thinking about last night. I didn't text back. Not yet. Instead, I waited for Laura to come downstairs. She moved around the house like nothing was wrong, heating leftovers and flipping through channels on the TV. I sat across from her, watching her, pretending everything was normal. By the time she went to bed, I knew exactly how I was going to handle this. The next morning, after she left for work, I picked up my phone and texted Greg from her number. "Let's meet Friday at 7 p.m. The usual place. I've got something special planned." I smiled as the typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. "Greg, can't wait." Neither could I. Friday came faster than I expected. Laura spent the morning fussing over her outfit in front of the mirror, debating between two dresses. I watched from the doorway, sipping my coffee, knowing full well she wasn't dressing up for me. "What do you think?" she asked, holding up a sleek black dress that hugged her curves in all the right places. "Looks perfect," I said, forcing a smile. "You'll knock him dead at that client dinner, right?" She flashed a quick smile, distracted as she smoothed the fabric over her hips. "Yeah, some big shots are coming in from out of town. Gotta make a good impression." "Good impression." "Sure." She kissed me lightly as she left, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air. That same floral scent Greg probably inhaled the last time he pressed his face against her neck. I didn't bother to watch her drive away. I had work to do. At exactly 6:30 p.m., I parked across from the Ritz, the same hotel I found them in last time. I'd booked a room 2 floors above their usual. I wasn't here to catch them in the act again. I was here to set the stage. Greg arrived first, pulling up in his Audi. He stepped out, smoothing his shirt, checking his reflection in the car window, like some nervous teenager on a first date. Pathetic. I waited. 5 minutes later, Laura's car appeared. She didn't see me. I made sure of it. She parked 2 rows over, and I watched as she climbed out, adjusting her dress, checking her phone one last time before heading inside. I let them settle in. At 7:15, I walked in. The lobby was warm, bustling with travelers. I rode the elevator up, stopping outside room 614, their usual spot. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. Instead, I slid an envelope under the door. Inside were the screenshots. Every text, every photo, every detail of their affair laid out in black and white. A little souvenir for Greg. I headed back to my room, ordered a drink from room service, and waited. At 8 p.m., my phone buzzed. It wasn't Laura. It was Greg. His message was short, but I could feel the panic bleeding through the screen. Greg, who the fuck are you? I laughed. God, I've been waiting for this. I typed slowly, carefully, wanted to twist the knife just right. Me, her husband. The typing bubbles appeared immediately, then stopped. I let him sweat. 2 hours later, Laura came home. She walked through the door quietly, setting her purse on the counter like nothing had happened. I stayed seated in the living room, sipping whiskey, eyes locked on the fireplace. How was dinner? I asked, keeping my voice even. She glanced over, startled. Oh, fine. The clients were impressed. I nodded slowly. Good. I'm sure Greg enjoyed himself too. The blood drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter, steadying herself. W, what are you talking about? She stammered, her voice cracking. I leaned back in my chair, crossing one leg over the other, eyes locked on hers. I know, Laura. About the hotel. The texts. All of it. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I saw you. I continued, my voice cold. Last month, room 614. And tonight, I left Greg a little gift. I'm sure he's flipping through it right about now. Tears welled in her eyes, and for a second, I thought she'd break down. Instead, she straightened, forcing that familiar fake calm over her face. This isn't what you think. I slammed my glass down, the sharp crack of it against the table cutting her off. Don't, I snapped. Don't insult me with more lies. She flinched, tears streaming freely now, but I didn't care. You made your choice, Laura. Now you live with it. Her lip quivered. Can we talk about this? Please. I stood up, towering over her. Talk? Sure. Let's talk about how you fucked Greg in our bed last month while I was out of town. Or maybe about how you snuck off to the Ritz while I was home waiting for you. How long has it been, Laura? A year? 2. She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen. I laughed, bitter and sharp. You didn't mean for it to happen? That's funny, because it sure as hell seemed intentional when you were sending him photos of you in lingerie I never saw. She crumbled, collapsing onto the couch, shoulders shaking. I let her cry. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, she looked up, mascara streaking her face. What happens now? I stared down at her, feeling nothing but cold, burning satisfaction. I don't know, Laura, but Greg sure as hell won't be seeing you again. Not after I sent those screenshots to his boss. Seems they have a no fraternization policy at his firm. Her eyes widened in horror. Oh, and by the way, I added, grabbing my coat, I'm filing for divorce first thing Monday. I hope he's worth everything you're about to lose. I left her sitting there, shattered, drowning in the wreckage she built with her own hands. The drive to Greg's house that night felt surreal, like I was floating above it all, detached from the storm I'd just unleashed. I didn't plan to stop, just cruise by and catch a glimpse of him through the window, see if he was drowning in the fallout yet. His neighborhood was quiet, sterile in that upper-middle-class kind of way, each house a carbon copy of the next. I parked a block down, killing the lights as I sat there in the dark. I didn't have to wait long. Greg's front door swung open at 9:30 p.m. sharp. He stepped outside, phone pressed to his ear, pacing the driveway, like a caged animal. Even from a distance, I could see the panic in his movements, the frantic way he ran his hand through his hair, the sharp glances toward his house. Good. Let him sweat. I cracked the window slightly, listening. His voice carried just enough. She said he knows. Greg hissed his back to me. Laura's freaking out. Thinks he's going to burn her life down. A pause. I don't know. He left pictures. Fucking pictures, Christine. He's got everything. Christine? I sat up a little straighter. Just look, I don't know if he'll go after you, but he's unpredictable. We need to be careful. No calls, no texts. I'll handle it. Just stay away from him. I stared at him, narrowing my eyes. Christine. His voice was too familiar with her name. A second affair? A slow smile crept across my face. Oh, this was too good. Laura was still awake when I got home. I could hear her footsteps pacing the bedroom as I stepped inside. She must have been waiting to pounce, because the second the door clicked shut, she stormed down the stairs. Her eyes were red, lips trembling, but there was fire behind it now. What did you do? She snapped, voice barely above a whisper. I leaned casually against the door, shrugging off my jacket. I told you. Greg got a few photos. His boss got the rest. Thought they'd appreciate knowing what kind of man's representing their company. Her hands balled into fists. You're ruining lives, James. Don't you think this has gone far enough? I met her gaze head on, watching as she squirmed under the weight of her own guilt. Far enough? I repeated, letting the words hang between us. No, Laura. Far enough would have been before you decided to screw Greg behind my back. I'm just finishing what you started. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, swallowing whatever pathetic excuse she'd been about to throw at me. Good. I stepped forward, lowering my voice to a near growl. You don't get to play the victim, Laura. Not after you lied to my face for months. You destroyed this marriage the second you decided I wasn't enough. Her eyes flashed with something: shame, anger, regret. I didn't care which. I made a mistake, she said, voice trembling now. But this, James, you're tearing everything apart. Please, let's stop. We can fix this. I laughed, the sound hollow. Fix it? You think I want to fix this? Her eyes widened, and I watched the realization settle in. There was no fixing it. Not for me. I filed the divorce papers this afternoon. I said simply, watching as her world crumbled right in front of me. By Monday, you'll have a copy on your desk. You can keep the house. I want none of it. Her lips parted, but no words came. I'm done, Laura. She sank onto the bottom step, silent tears rolling down her face. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I didn't stop at just Greg. Over the next few days, I made sure everyone in his life knew exactly what kind of man he was. His neighbors, his boss, even his ex-wife. By the end of the week, I heard whispers he'd been let go, something about conduct unbecoming. Laura didn't mention it. She hardly looked me in the eye. But Greg? Greg broke. It happened Thursday night. I was in the garage, packing up old boxes when his number lit up my phone. I let it ring 3 times before answering. James, Greg started, his voice raw, shaking with barely contained rage. Listen, man, I get it. You're pissed. But this is insane. I said nothing, letting the silence press in. You made your point, all right? Just leave Christine out of it. I smiled. Bingo. Oh, I don't think I will, I replied calmly. She seems nice. Maybe I'll pay her a visit next. Greg's breathing grew ragged. You're a fucking psychopath. No, great. I'm just a husband cleaning house. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment, then tossed it aside, feeling lighter than I had in months. Laura spent the next few nights in the guest room. We didn't speak beyond polite exchanges, but I could see the weight pressing down on her shoulders. She knew this wasn't over. Not yet. By Saturday morning, Laura looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the slight tremble in her hands as she poured coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, watching her carefully. She was wearing one of my old sweatshirts, probably some pathetic attempt to remind me of better times. Too late for that. She didn't say a word as she sat across from me, nursing the mug like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The silence was unbearable, but I didn't plan on breaking it. Not yet. When her phone buzzed, she jumped like she'd been shocked. Her hand shot out to grab it, but I was faster. I snatched it off the table and held it just out of reach, watching the panic bloom across her face. "Greg again?" I asked, smirking as she stood, reaching for it. "James, give it back," she said, her voice wavering. I glanced down at the screen. "Christine." "Oh, this just kept getting better," I answered, putting the call on speaker. "Hello, Christine." There was silence for a few beats before a cautious voice replied. "Who is this?" I leaned back in my chair, eyes never leaving Laura's. "This is James, Laura's husband. I think we've met. Indirectly." "James, hang up," Laura hissed, stepping closer, eyes blazing with panic. I ignored her, listening carefully to the way Christine's breathing quickened. "Listen, I don't know what you're trying to pull," Christine said, her voice sharpening. "But this isn't." "Oh, I'm not trying to pull anything," I cut in, smiling. "I just thought you'd like to know Greg's been keeping secrets from you too. You two really should compare notes." The line went dead. Laura ripped the phone from my hand, her chest rising and falling as she tried to steady herself. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped, but there was no real fire behind it. She was too shaken. I stood slowly, circling the table like a predator. "What's wrong with me?" I repeated, my voice calm and even. "You cheated, Laura. 4 months. Lied to my face. Came home to our bed smelling like him. And now you have the nerve to stand there and ask what's wrong with me." Her lips trembled, and for a second, I thought she might actually apologize. But she didn't. "You're not innocent either," she shot back, her voice breaking. "You've been cruel." I laughed coldly. "Yeah? Well, I learned from the best." She stared at me, tears threatening to spill again, but I wasn't moved. "I want you gone by the end of the week," I said, stepping back, leaving her to stand there in silence. "I've already talked to a lawyer. We'll divide everything up, but you're not staying here." Her eyes widened. "James, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can go to counseling." "No," I interrupted, my voice final. "There's no fixing this, Laura." I left her standing there, the weight of her choices crushing her as I walked away. That evening, I packed the last of my things into the car. I wasn't planning on staying in the house. I didn't want to. It felt tainted. Laura stood by the front door, watching me load the trunk. She didn't cry this time, just watched, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I wouldn't. I stopped in front of her, holding her gaze for a long moment. "Goodbye, Laura," I said quietly. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I turned, got into the car, and drove away without looking back. As I pulled onto the main road, Greg's house came into view in the rearview mirror. He was outside, pacing his driveway again. But this time, he wasn't alone. A moving truck sat in front of his house, workers hauling furniture out piece by piece. I smiled. His life was crumbling, just like Laura's, and I didn't feel a shred of guilt. By Monday morning, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, finalizing the paperwork that would sever the last thread tying me to Laura. Alan, my lawyer, glanced over the documents and nodded approvingly. "It's straightforward. Infidelity on her part, grounds for immediate divorce. You're entitled to half the assets, but based on the evidence you've provided," he tapped the thick envelope I handed him, filled with photos and screenshots, "you could push for more. Judges don't take kindly to this kind of betrayal." I shook my head. "I don't want more, Alan. I just want out." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. "All right. I'll have the papers served by Friday. She'll get the official notice soon enough." I signed the last page with a sense of finality, sliding the papers back across the desk. "Thanks, Alan." As I left the office, I felt lighter. Laura was already unraveling without me having to lift a finger. By Wednesday, her car was parked in the driveway well past noon. She wasn't going to work. She wasn't going anywhere. I could picture her inside, curled up on the couch, staring at her phone, waiting for Greg to call. But Greg wasn't calling. Christine made sure of that. Greg's life was unraveling faster than hers. After Christine received my little phone call, I made sure she got a flash drive loaded with all the evidence Greg's boss had seen. The kind of evidence a bitter ex-wife could use to absolutely gut someone in divorce court. And Greg, well, Greg had a lot more to lose than Laura. Christine filed for divorce 2 days later. Word around the neighborhood was she kicked Greg out, emptied the joint bank accounts, and even took his dog. Cold, but I couldn't blame her. Friday evening, I found myself driving past Greg's house again. Curiosity, I wanted to see how far the fallout had spread. I didn't even have to park. Greg was standing outside, shoving boxes into the trunk of his Audi. His face was red, sweat, rage, embarrassment. I wasn't sure. He slammed the trunk shut so hard I thought the glass might shatter. I rolled down my window, just enough for him to see me. He froze. For a second, we just stared at each other across the street. He knew exactly why I was there. "You did this," he growled, stepping toward the curb. I shrugged, feigning innocence. "I didn't make you cheat, Greg." His hands clenched at his sides, fists trembling. "You ruined my life." I smiled coldly. "So did you." He stood there, seething, his mouth twisting into something ugly. "Stay the hell away from me," he spat, storming back to his car. I watched him peel out of the driveway, tires screeching as he disappeared down the road. He wouldn't be back. I didn't hear much from Laura after that. She tried texting once or twice, apologies, desperate pleas to meet for coffee, to talk things through. I ignored them all. By the time the papers were officially served, she didn't even put up a fight. She signed them the same day. 2 weeks later, I packed up the last of my belongings from the house and left the keys on the counter. The empty rooms felt foreign, stripped bare of the life we'd built together. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. As I closed the door behind me, I glanced once more at the house. It wasn't mine anymore, and that was perfectly fine by me. Laura could keep the shell of our life. I was moving on. A year passed before I thought about Laura again. Not in the bitter, twisted way I used to. More like an old scar, faint, distant, something you could touch but barely feel anymore. I'd build a new life, one that didn't revolve around her or Greg or the mess they left behind. New job, new routines, even started dating again, though nothing serious. I liked the quiet of living alone, the peace of not having to second-guess the person lying beside me. But the past has a funny way of knocking on your door when you least expect it. I was at the grocery store, pushing a cart through the cereal aisle when I saw her. Laura. She was near the frozen foods, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. Her hair was shorter now, and she looked older. Not in a bad way, but there was a weight to her, like she carried something she couldn't quite put down. I could have walked past, could have pretended not to see her, but I didn't. I parked the cart a few feet away, leaning against the handle casually. I wasn't hiding. If she looked up, she'd see me. And she did. Her eyes flicked toward me, and for a moment, she froze. The man beside her said something, but she didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, wide and uncertain. I gave her a small nod, acknowledgement, nothing more, and turned back toward the shelves, reaching for a box of granola I didn't really need. By the time I glanced back, she was gone. Later that night, as I sat in my apartment watching the city lights flicker outside the window, I thought about her again. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even curious. I just hoped she was doing better. Greg was gone from town. Last I heard, he relocated after his divorce was finalized. Apparently, his ex-wife made sure there wasn't much left for him here. Good. I opened my phone, scrolling through old texts and photos, deleting the ones I'd kept for proof. I didn't need them anymore. Let them both drift away, like smoke in the wind. A few months later, I got a new job offer in another state. A fresh start. I packed up the last of my belongings, feeling lighter than I ever had. As I drove away from the city, I didn't look back. Laura was just another chapter in a book I'd already finished. And I was more than ready to start writing the next one. 6 months into my new life, I almost forgot what it felt like to live under the weight of betrayal. The new job was good. Nothing groundbreaking but stable. The town was smaller, quieter. It suited me. I rented a modest house on the edge of a wooded area, just far enough from the city to feel disconnected from the noise. Nights were peaceful. No more lying awake, wondering whose text Laura was giggling at. No more coming home to an empty house, suspicious of every late meeting or unexpected errand. It felt clean until I got the letter. It showed up in my mailbox on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Plain envelope, no return address. My name scrawled across the front in handwriting I hadn't seen in over a year. Loris. I stood there for a while, raindrops trickling down the back of my neck, staring at the envelope like it might explode in my hand. I should have tossed it, but curiosity, that damage I thought I'd outgrown, wouldn't let me. I took it inside, sitting down at the kitchen table, letting the envelope drip water across the surface. I stared at it for another 5 minutes before finally tearing it open. A single sheet of paper, folded twice. James, I know I have no right to reach out to you, and I wouldn't blame you for throwing this away without reading it. But I needed to say this. I'm sorry, not just for the affair, but for all of it. For the lies, the gaslighting, the way I made you question your own instincts. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I've thought about what I did every single day since you walked out that door. Greg was never worth it. You were right. He was just a distraction. One that cost me everything. I see that now. I heard you moved. I hope you're happy. I really do. You deserve to be. Take care of yourself. Laura. I stared at the letter for a long time, the weight of her words hanging in the stillness of the kitchen. There were no excuses in it. No pleas to meet up. No thinly veiled attempts to weasel her way back in. Just regret. I folded the letter back up, sliding it into the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer beneath the sink. Not because I planned to keep it, but because I wasn't sure what else to do with it. Maybe one day I'd burn it. But not today. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the rain patter against the windows, I thought about Laura's words. I felt nothing. No spark of hope. No anger. Just closure. And that, I realized, was all I ever really needed. Weeks passed, and the letter stayed tucked away, untouched. Life settled back into its quiet rhythm. Work, occasional drinks with coworkers, weekends spent hiking the wooded trails behind the house. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't known before. But peace, I learned, has a strange habit of stirring ghosts. One Saturday afternoon, I stopped by a small bookstore in town. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just wandering through the aisles when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Soft, hesitant. James? I turned, and there she was. Laura. I hadn't seen her in over a year. Not since the cafe. She looked different. Thinner maybe. Tired. But there was something else. The nervous energy I'd always associated with her was gone. She carried herself differently, like someone who had nothing left to lose. I stared at her for a moment, unsure if I should say anything. But she spoke first. I wasn't expecting to see you here, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Same, I replied, keeping my voice even. She glanced down at the book in her hand, fiddling with the corner of the cover. I moved a few months ago. New job. New place. I nodded slowly. Good for you. Silence stretched between us. Did you read it? She asked softly, eyes flicking up to meet mine. I didn't need to ask what she meant. Yeah, I said, shoving my hands into my pockets. I read it. Laura waited, searching my face for something. Maybe forgiveness, maybe closure. I meant every word, she added quietly. I wasn't expecting a response. I just needed to say it. I nodded, unsure what else to say. For a brief moment, I thought about the life we had, the good parts. The weekends spent curled up on the couch, the road trips, the way she used to laugh at my terrible cooking attempts. Then I thought about Greg, about the hotel room, the lies. Laura, I said finally, I'm glad you're doing better, but I'm not the same guy I was back then. Her eyes softened, and she smiled faintly. I know. And somehow, that was enough. We stood there for another minute before she stepped back, offering a small wave. Take care of yourself, James. You too. She walked away without another word, disappearing into the crowded bookstore aisles. I watched her go, waiting for the weight of old memories to crash down on me. But they didn't. Instead, I felt lighter. I left the bookstore empty-handed, stepping out into the cool afternoon air. And for the first time in a long while, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Laura was just someone I used to know, and I was okay with that.